I never expected that warming up my truck on a January morning in Cedar Rapids, Iowa would lead to the most bizarre battle of my life with the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association. My name is Zachary Simmons, and I had been living in this cookie-cutter subdivision for 3 years without any real issues. The houses all looked the same, varying shades of beige and gray, with meticulously maintained lawns that the HOA inspected with military precision. I worked as an automotive technician at Henderson's Auto Repair on First Avenue, and my schedule often had me leaving before sunrise during the brutal Iowa winters. That particular morning, the temperature had dropped to negative 12 degrees. I woke up at 5:30, showered, grabbed my coffee, and headed out to my 2018 Ford F-150. Like any sensible person who values their vehicle's longevity, I started the engine and let it idle for about 10 minutes while I finished my coffee inside and grabbed my lunch. This was standard procedure for anyone who knew anything about engines in sub-zero temperatures. Cold starts put enormous strain on engine components, and letting the vehicle warm up properly helps the oil circulate and protects the engine from premature wear. What I did not know was that Patricia Morrison, the HOA president, had been watching from her window across the street. 3 days later, I found a certified letter in my mailbox. The envelope had the Meadowbrook Estates HOA logo emblazoned on it, and I felt my stomach drop before I even opened it. Inside was a formal violation notice stating that I had violated Section 7.3b of the community bylaws, which prohibited unnecessary idling of vehicles for extended periods in driveways or street parking. The fine was $250. I read the letter 3 times, certain I was missing something. Warming up your vehicle in winter was not unnecessary idling. It was basic automotive maintenance. The letter cited concerns about noise pollution, emissions, and general disturbance to the neighborhood peace. At 5:40 in the morning, when everyone's furnaces were running and making just as much noise, I called the number listed on the letter and got Patricia Morrison's voicemail. Her greeting was exactly what I expected, clipped, formal, and dripping with self-importance. I left a polite message explaining that I was simply warming up my vehicle before work and requesting a meeting to discuss the fine. She called back 2 hours later while I was in the middle of replacing brake pads on a Honda Civic. "Mr. Simmons, the rules are quite clear," Patricia said without preamble. "Idling vehicles create unnecessary noise and pollution in our community. Several neighbors have complained." "Several neighbors?" I asked, wiping grease from my hands. "It's barely light out when I leave for work." "Who exactly is complaining?" "That information is confidential," she replied primly. "But the complaints are valid and the fine stands. You have 30 days to pay or we will place a lien on your property." "A lien? For warming up my truck? Patricia, it was negative 12 degrees that morning." "I'm not going to destroy my engine to satisfy some arbitrary rule that doesn't make sense. The rules apply to everyone equally, Mr. Simmons. If we make an exception for you, we would have to make exceptions for everyone. I suggest you find alternative arrangements. Perhaps you could park in your garage. My garage is full of tools and equipment for my side work. I use my driveway. Then you will need to adapt. Good day, Mr. Simmons." She hung up before I could respond. I spent the rest of my shift fuming. The fine was ridiculous, but what bothered me more was the principle of it. I was not doing anything wrong. I was taking care of my vehicle and leaving for work without bothering anyone. But Patricia Morrison had apparently decided to make an example of me. That evening, I pulled out my copy of the HOA bylaws and read through the entire document. Section 7.3. B did technically prohibit extended idling, but it was clearly intended for people who sat in their driveways with engines running for hours, not someone warming up their vehicle for 10 minutes before work. The language was vague enough that Patricia could interpret it however she wanted. I decided to pay the fine under protest and submitted a formal written objection to the board. I was not going to stop warming up my truck, but I would document everything going forward. The next morning, I started my truck at 5:30 and set a timer on my phone, exactly 10 minutes. I took photos showing the temperature reading on my phone, -8 degrees. Then I drove to work. 2 weeks later, I received another fine, $250, same violation. This time, I did not bother calling. I went directly to Patricia Morrison's house after work. She lived in one of the larger homes in the development, a 2-story colonial with perfect landscaping and one of those wooden signs next to the door that said "The Morrisons" in cursive script. Patricia answered the door in yoga pants and a fleece pullover, her blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail. She was probably in her late 40s, with the kind of pinched expression that suggested she spent most of her time finding fault with things. "Mr. Simmons," she said, not inviting me in. "If you are here about the fine, I have nothing further to discuss." "Patricia, this is getting ridiculous. I'm warming up my vehicle for safety reasons. 10 minutes, that's it. You're fining me for basic vehicle maintenance. The rule is clear, no extended idling. If you cannot follow the rules, perhaps Meadowbrook Estates is not the right community for you." That statement right there told me everything I needed to know. This was not about rules or noise or emissions. This was about control. Patricia Morrison got off on wielding her tiny amount of power over her neighbors. "Fine," I said. "I'll see you at the next board meeting." Her expression shifted slightly. "Board meetings are the third Tuesday of each month, 7 p.m. at the community center. I'll be there." I walked back to my truck, my mind racing. If Patricia wanted to play games, I could play games too. But I needed leverage. That's when I remembered something important. Something I had been doing for months without even thinking about it. Something that was about to become very relevant. You see, my job as an automotive technician meant I kept a set of jumper cables, a portable jump starter, and basic tools in my truck at all times. And over the past year, I had become the unofficial go-to person in Meadowbrook Estates whenever someone's battery died. Which happened a lot during Iowa winters. I started keeping a mental list. There was Patricia Morrison herself, whose Lexus SUV I had jump-started twice last winter when she left her lights on. There was Douglas Morrison, her husband, whose BMW had a parasitic drain that kept killing his battery. I had jumped his car at least 4 times and had even diagnosed the problem for him, though he never got it fixed. There was Linda Chen 3 houses down, whose minivan had a weak battery. Gerald Thompson, whose ancient Buick barely started even in summer. Margaret Whitfield, who constantly left her interior lights on. The Hendersons, whose teenage son did the same thing with his hand-me-down Civic. I had helped probably 15 different households over the past year, often at inconvenient times, always without asking for anything in return. It was just being a good neighbor. But now I realized that every single one of those people had stayed silent while Patricia Morrison harassed me over warming up my truck. The board meeting was 3 weeks away. In the meantime, I received a third fine, another $250. The letter stated that continued violations would result in increased fines and potential legal action. I paid all 3 fines, keeping detailed records of everything. $750 for the crime of warming up my vehicle. I also started documenting every single time I saw another vehicle idling in the neighborhood. Patricia's Lexus, idling in her driveway while she loaded groceries, 14 minutes. Douglas Morrison's BMW, idling while he scraped ice off the windows, 12 minutes. A landscaping truck working on the Henderson property, 45 minutes. I took photos and timestamps of everything. If Patricia wanted to enforce this rule, it had better apply to everyone equally. The Tuesday before the board meeting, the temperature dropped to negative 18 degrees. That evening, around 9 p.m., I heard a knock on my door. It was Douglas Morrison, Patricia's husband. He was a soft-spoken accountant who usually stayed out of his wife's HOA business. "Zach, I'm really sorry to bother you," he said, shivering on my doorstep. "My car won't start and I have an early meeting tomorrow. I tried calling AAA, but they're backed up with calls. Any chance you could help me out?" I looked at Douglas Morrison standing there in the cold, desperate for help. The same Douglas Morrison who lived with Patricia Morrison, who presumably knew about the fines his wife was levying against me, who had never once said anything about how absurd it was. "No," I said simply. "Sorry, I can't help you." Douglas blinked. "Oh, okay. I understand you're probably busy. Maybe tomorrow morning before you leave for work." "No, Douglas, you don't understand. I'm not going to help you. I'm not going to jump-start your car anymore. Not yours, not Patricia's, not anyone else's in this neighborhood." His face went pale. "Is this about the fines?" "Look, I told Patricia I thought they were excessive, but she's really strict about the rules." "You told her they were excessive, but you didn't vote against them. You didn't speak up at a board meeting. You didn't do anything except watch while your wife fined me $750 for warming up my truck in sub-zero temperatures. I'm not on the board. I don't have a vote. But you're married to the president. You have influence. You chose not to use it. So now you can call AAA and wait like everyone else. Good night, Douglas." I closed the door. My hands were shaking slightly, but not from anger, from satisfaction. It felt good to finally draw a line. The next morning, Douglas's BMW was still in the driveway when I left for work. I started my truck, let it warm up for exactly 10 minutes while I drank my coffee inside, then drove to work. I noticed Patricia's curtains twitching as I pulled out of my driveway. That day at work, I received 3 text messages from neighbors asking for jump starts. Linda Chen's minivan was dead. Gerald Thompson's Buick would not turn over. Margaret Whitfield had left her lights on again. I replied to each message with the same response. "Sorry, I can't help with that anymore. Try calling roadside assistance." By Thursday, I had received 7 requests. By Friday, 11. Apparently, word had not spread yet about my new policy, or people assumed I was just busy and would help eventually. The board meeting was on Tuesday evening. I arrived at the Meadowbrook Estates Community Center at 6:55 p.m., carrying a folder with all my documentation. The community center was a modest building near the subdivision entrance, with a main room that served for meetings and events. About 20 other residents were already there, scattered among the folding chairs. Patricia Morrison sat at a table at the front of the room with 4 other board members. I recognized them all. Thomas Wheeler, the vice president, was a retired engineer who mostly rubber-stamped whatever Patricia wanted. Sandra Nguyen, the secretary, was a pleasant woman who seemed perpetually overwhelmed by Patricia's intensity. Richard Kemper, the treasurer, was a banker who treated HOA finances like corporate budgets. And Denise Hoffman, a member-at-large, was Patricia's closest friend and biggest supporter. The meeting started with standard business: approval of previous meeting minutes, financial reports, discussion of landscaping contracts. I sat quietly, waiting for my turn. Finally, Patricia asked if there was any new business. I stood up. "Yes, I would like to address the fines I have received for warming up my vehicle. Patricia's expression did not change. The matter has been addressed, Mr. Simmons. You violated the rules and were fined accordingly. The fines have been paid. There is nothing further to discuss. Actually, there is quite a bit to discuss, I said, opening my folder. I've been fined $750 for warming up my truck for approximately 10 minutes before leaving for work in sub-zero temperatures. This is standard automotive practice and necessary for engine protection. I would like the board to explain how this constitutes a violation when other residents regularly idle their vehicles for much longer periods without consequence. I pulled out my documentation and started reading off examples. Patricia Morrison, January 18th, 14 minutes of idling while loading groceries. Douglas Morrison, January 23rd, 12 minutes of idling while scraping windows. Henderson Landscaping Service, January 20th, 45 minutes of continuous idling. I have photographs, timestamps, and witnesses for all of these. The room had gone very quiet. Several residents were now paying close attention. Patricia's face had flushed red. Those are completely different circumstances. Loading groceries and scraping windows are necessary activities. Your idling serves no purpose. My idling serves the purpose of protecting a $30,000 vehicle from engine damage caused by cold starts. That's more necessary than loading groceries. Thomas Wheeler cleared his throat. Patricia, perhaps we should review the policy. The rule is meant to address excessive idling, not routine warm-ups. The rule is clear, Patricia snapped, and Mr. Simmons has violated it repeatedly despite being warned. Then enforce it equally, I said. Fine everyone who idles their vehicle for more than 5 minutes. Put up signs. Send out reminders, but you can't selectively enforce rules just because you personally don't like someone. Sandra Nguyen spoke up quietly. Zach has a point. We should be consistent with rule enforcement. We are consistent, Patricia insisted. Mr. Simmons is the only one who has been repeatedly observed violating this rule in the early morning hours when it disturbs residents. Which residents? I asked. You told me several people complained. I would like their names and a record of their complaints. That information is confidential. It's not, actually. Under Iowa law, HOA complaint records are accessible to the homeowner being accused. I've checked. So either produce the complaints or admit that you are the only person who has a problem with this. Patricia's jaw clenched. This discussion is over. The fines stand. If you wish to appeal, you may submit a written request and the board will review it. I'm submitting my appeal right now in person in front of witnesses. I'm requesting that all 3 fines be reversed and that the board establish a clear, written policy on vehicle idling that will be enforced equally for all residents. Your request is noted. We will discuss it in executive session and notify you of our decision. Is there any other new business? I sat down, frustrated but not surprised. Patricia Morrison was not going to back down publicly. But I had made my point in front of the other residents, and I could see several people nodding in agreement. After the meeting, 3 different neighbors approached me. One was Gerald Thompson, the elderly man with the Buick. That was well said, Zach, Gerald told me. Patricia's been out of control for years. Someone needed to stand up to her. Thanks, Gerald. By the way, I got your text about needing a jump start. I'm not doing that anymore. His friendly expression faltered. What? Why not? Because you all sat there silently while Patricia fined me $750 for warming up my truck. Not one person spoke up on my behalf, so I've decided that I'm done helping people who won't help me. But that's not fair. I need help with my car. And I needed help with the HOA. You can call a towing service. They offer jump starts. I walked away, leaving Gerald sputtering behind me. Linda Chen caught up with me in the parking lot. Zach, wait. I wanted to say I'm sorry about the fines. Patricia was out of line. Did you tell her that? Well, no, but I thought it. Thinking it doesn't help me, Linda. Your minivan's battery issue is because you need a new alternator. Any mechanic can fix it. I recommend Henderson's Auto Repair on First Avenue. We do good work. But couldn't you just take a quick look at it? You've always been so helpful. I was helpful when I thought I was part of a community that looked out for each other. Now I know better. Good night, Linda. Over the next week, the requests for help intensified. Margaret Whitfield actually came to my house in person, upset that I would not help her jump her sedan. The Henderson kid sent me angry text messages calling me selfish. Gerald Thompson left a voicemail saying I was being petty and childish. None of them seemed to grasp the irony. They wanted me to help them for free, while simultaneously supporting an HOA president, who was fining me for basic vehicle maintenance. They wanted the benefits of having a skilled automotive technician in the neighborhood without any of the reciprocal respect or support. Douglas Morrison tried again on Thursday evening. This time he offered to pay me. "I'll give you $50 if you jump-start my BMW," he said at my door. "I know you're upset about Patricia's decisions, but I really need my car working." Douglas, do you know why your battery keeps dying? It's old, I guess. No, you have a parasitic drain somewhere in your electrical system. Something is pulling power even when the car is off. I told you this 6 months ago. You need to take it to a mechanic and get it properly diagnosed and repaired. Jumping it every few days is not a solution. That sounds expensive. It's going to be a lot more expensive when you're stranded somewhere important, and I'm not going to enable your procrastination anymore. Take it to a shop. You are really going to hold a grudge over some HOA fines. This is not about a grudge, Douglas. This is about respect. Your wife has fined me $750 and threatened to put a lien on my house. You think I should still come running to help you every time your battery dies because you're too cheap to fix the actual problem? He left without another word. 10 days after the board meeting, I received a letter from the HOA. The board had reviewed my appeal and voted 4-1 to uphold the fines. The dissenting vote was Sandra Nguyen, according to the letter. They had also decided that my documentation of other vehicles idling was insufficient evidence, and that no other violations had occurred. The letter concluded by warning me that any future violations would result in fines of $500 per incident. I read the letter twice, then pulled out my phone and called a lawyer. I had no idea if I had any legal recourse, but I was done playing nice. The lawyer's name was Jennifer Ellis, and she specialized in property law and HOA disputes. Her office was in downtown Cedar Rapids, a modest suite in a converted historic building. Jennifer was in her mid-30s, sharp-eyed and direct. HOA disputes are tricky, she told me during our consultation. They have a lot of latitude to create and enforce rules. However, they have to enforce them fairly and consistently. Selective enforcement is one area where you might have a case. So what are my options? You can sue the HOA for discriminatory enforcement and seek to have the fines reversed, but litigation is expensive and time-consuming. A better approach might be to gather more evidence of unequal enforcement, document everything, and present a formal complaint. If that doesn't work, then we consider legal action. I've already documented other violations. They dismiss them. Then document more. Record board meetings. Get statements from other residents. Build an airtight case. Also, make sure you're in perfect compliance with every other HOA rule. They might start looking for other violations to fine you for. That's harassment. Yes, but proving it is difficult. My advice is to keep detailed records, stay calm, and don't give them any ammunition. And if you decide to sue, we will need to show a pattern of behavior, not just one incident. I left Jennifer's office feeling slightly better but also exhausted by the whole situation. I just wanted to warm up my truck and go to work. How had this become my life? February brought more bitter cold and more dead batteries. The requests for help had finally slowed down as people realized I was serious about not providing free jump-start services anymore. I noticed several neighbors now kept portable jump starters in their cars, which was probably what they should have been doing all along. Patricia Morrison and I did not speak, but the tension was obvious. She watched me every morning from her window when I started my truck. I made sure to time exactly 10 minutes, not a second longer, and I documented every instance with photos. Then something interesting happened. On February 14th, Valentine's Day, a massive ice storm hit Cedar Rapids. Freezing rain coated everything in a thick layer of ice. Power lines came down, trees collapsed, and car batteries across the city failed en masse. I woke up that morning to find my street in chaos. The power was out, which meant no garage door openers for those who parked inside. The few cars in driveways were encased in ice. And absolutely nothing was starting in the cold. I had anticipated this possibility. My truck was in the driveway, and I had parked it strategically the night before so I could get out easily. I also had a heavy-duty ice scraper and winter survival gear in the cab. My truck started on the first try because I maintained it properly and had installed a high-quality battery designed for extreme cold. As I scraped ice off my windshield, I watched the neighborhood wake up to the disaster. Douglas Morrison came out and tried unsuccessfully to start his BMW. Patricia emerged in her designer winter coat and discovered her Lexus was completely dead. Up and down the street, neighbors struggled with frozen locks and dead batteries. My phone started buzzing with text messages before I even finished clearing my windows. Douglas Morrison. Emergency. Need jump start. Will pay $200. Linda Chen. Please, Zach, my husband needs to get to the hospital for dialysis. Margaret Whitfield. My car won't start and I have nowhere else to turn. I finished scraping my windows, got in my truck and backed out of my driveway. As I drove past the Morrisons' house, Patricia flagged me down. I stopped and rolled down my window. Zach, thank goodness, she said, her usual composure cracking. My car won't start and I have an important appointment. I know we've had our differences, but I really need your help. Call a towing service, I said. They offer jump starts. They're all backed up because of the storm. Please, just this once, I'll pay you. You can't afford what I charge for services, Patricia. Not after taking $750 from me for warming up my truck. Are you seriously going to let our personal issues prevent you from helping people in an emergency? No. I'm going to let your personal vendetta against me reap its natural consequences. You made it very clear that I'm not a valued member of this community, so I'm not acting like one anymore. This is childish and petty. No, it's practical. I have jumper cables and skills. You have rules and fines. We all make choices. Enjoy your appointment. I drove away, watching her stunned expression in my rearview mirror. My phone continued buzzing with increasingly desperate messages, which I ignored. When I got to work, I turned off my phone and focused on my job. Henderson's Auto Repair was slammed that day. Every bay was full, and the waiting room overflowed with stranded motorists. We worked straight through lunch, jumping dead batteries, replacing frozen wiper fluid lines and fixing vehicles damaged by the ice storm. It was exhausting but profitable when I finally checked my phone at 6 p.m. I had 37 missed calls and 23 text messages. Most were from Meadowbrook Estates residents. Several were angry, calling me selfish and spiteful. A few were desperate pleas. One was from Patricia Morrison, threatening me with further HOA action for refusing to help during a community emergency. I deleted them all and drove home. The power was still out in the neighborhood when I arrived. Several houses had generators running. Most people were huddled inside, trying to stay warm. I noticed that several driveways now had tow trucks or mobile mechanic services working on vehicles. Good. They were figuring it out. That evening, sitting in my cold house with candles and flashlights, I wondered if I was being too harsh. These were my neighbors, after all. Some of them had nothing to do with Patricia's vendetta. Linda Chen's husband really did need dialysis. Gerald Thompson was elderly and probably struggling. But then I remembered the board meeting. The silence when I asked for support. The dismissal of my appeal. The $750 in fines for warming up my vehicle in sub-zero temperatures. The threat of increased fines and liens. I had helped these people for over a year. I had jumped their cars at midnight in blizzards on holidays. I had given free advice, diagnosed problems, sometimes even fixed simple issues without charging. And when I needed them to simply say, "This fine is unreasonable," they had stayed silent. So no, I was not being too harsh. I was being rational. The power came back on around midnight. I heard the hum of the furnace kicking in and the beep of digital clocks resetting. By morning, the neighborhood looked almost normal, except for the icy coating still on everything and the obvious tension in the air. I saw Patricia Morrison watching from her window as I warmed up my truck. Exactly 10 minutes. I waved at her cheerfully before driving away. That day at work, my boss Randy Henderson pulled me aside during a break. "Heard you made some enemies in your HOA," Randy said with a grin. He was a gruff man in his 60s who had owned the shop for 30 years. News travels fast. Small community. Also, Patricia Morrison called here yesterday demanding to speak with you. Said it was an emergency. I told her you were busy saving other people who actually appreciated your help. Randy, you did not say that. I absolutely did. She tried to pull the whole "I demand to speak to your manager" routine. I told her I was the owner and I backed my employees 100%. She hung up on me. I laughed despite myself. She's probably going to leave bad reviews. Let her try. We've got a 30-year reputation and a waiting list of customers. We don't need business from people who treat skilled workers like servants. Randy's support meant more to me than he probably realized. At least someone understood. Over the next few weeks, the atmosphere in Meadowbrook Estates grew increasingly hostile. Patricia Morrison had apparently launched a campaign to paint me as the villain of the community. According to the neighborhood gossip, I was selfish, vindictive, and cruel for refusing to help during the ice storm. The fact that I had been fined $750 for warming up my truck was conveniently omitted from these conversations. Several neighbors stopped acknowledging me. Margaret Whitfield actually crossed the street to avoid passing me on her morning walk. The Henderson kid gave me dirty looks whenever he saw me. Douglas Morrison's BMW sat in their driveway with a "for sale" sign, apparently too expensive to fix properly. But there were also a few people who quietly showed support. Sandra Nguyen, the HOA secretary, stopped by one evening with a bottle of wine. "I voted against upholding those fines," she told me. "For what it's worth, Patricia was wrong. Why didn't you speak up at the meeting?" Because she's vicious when crossed. I'm trying to change things from the inside, but it's a slow process. She has Thomas and Denise completely under her thumb, and Richard only cares about the budget. So what am I supposed to do? Just accept harassment, build a case, document everything. Run for the board in the next election. That's in November. Get elected and vote her out. That's 9 months away. I know, but it's the only way to create real change. In the meantime, stay clean. Don't give her any ammunition. Sandra's visit gave me some hope, but 9 months was a long time to endure Patricia's crusade against me. In March, I received another fine. This one claimed I had violated landscaping standards by failing to trim my bushes to regulation height. The fine was $150. I measured every bush in my yard with a tape measure and documented that they were all within the specified height limits. I submitted photos and measurements to the board. The fine was upheld anyway, with a note that my measurements were inaccurate. In April, I received a fine for parking my truck improperly in my driveway. Apparently, it was angled 3 inches over the imaginary line that defined the center of my driveway space. $150. In May, I received a fine for having a decorative item visible from the street without approval. The decorative item was a wreath on my front door that I had hung for spring. $150. Each fine was accompanied by increasingly threatening language about liens and legal action. I paid each one under protest and documented everything for Jennifer Ellis, who was building a case for selective enforcement and harassment. "This is actually good," Jennifer told me during one of our meetings. "I know it doesn't feel good, but these escalating fines for increasingly trivial issues establish a clear pattern of targeted harassment, especially since I'm not seeing similar fines levied against other residents." How do you know other residents aren't being fined? Because HOA fine records are semi-public documents in Iowa. I requested the records for the past 2 years. You account for 70% of all fines levied in that time period. The other 30% is distributed among 3 other households, all for legitimate violations like extended construction projects without permits. So she's singling me out. Undeniably. The question is whether we can prove it's because of personal animus versus legitimate rule enforcement. That's where your evidence of unequal enforcement comes in. Keep documenting. I kept documenting. I photographed every overgrown bush, every vehicle idling, every minor violation I could find throughout the neighborhood. I was not doing this to be petty. I was doing it to prove that Patricia Morrison was selectively enforcing rules against me while ignoring identical violations by others. In June, something shifted. A new family moved into the house next to mine. Their name was Patterson, and they had 2 young kids and a friendly golden retriever named Buddy. The husband, Marcus Patterson, worked in IT. His wife Amy was a nurse at Mercy Medical Center. I introduced myself the day they moved in, helping them carry a few boxes despite my resolution to keep to myself. They seemed genuinely nice, and I figured I should at least warn them about the HOA. Patricia Morrison runs the HOA like a dictator, I told Marcus while we stood in his driveway after the moving truck left. Keep your grass exactly 2 inches high, don't park anything on the street overnight, and don't do anything that might be interpreted as a violation of the 50 pages of bylaws. Marcus laughed. That bad, huh? Worse. She's fined me over $1,000 in the past 6 months for things like warming up my truck and having bushes that were allegedly too tall. That's insane. Can't you fight it? I'm trying. Just be careful. She watches everyone. 3 days later, Amy Patterson knocked on my door. She looked upset. "Zach, I need to ask you something. Is the HOA president a blonde woman who drives a white Lexus?" "That's Patricia Morrison." "Why?" "She came to our house this morning and told us we needed to remove our garden gnomes from the front yard because they violate community aesthetic standards. We just put them out yesterday. My daughter picked them out specially." Did she give you a formal violation notice? No, just a verbal warning. She said if we don't remove them within 48 hours, we'll be fined. Don't remove them. Make her give you a formal written notice with a specific bylaw citation. Then check the bylaws to see if garden gnomes are actually prohibited. I'm guessing they're not. This is crazy. We just moved here. Welcome to Meadowbrook Estates. Amy did not remove the garden gnomes. 2 days later, she received a formal violation notice citing Section 9.2d, which prohibited unapproved decorative lawn ornaments. The fine was $150. Amy and Marcus came to my house that evening with the notice. "This is harassment, right?" Marcus asked. "Half the yards in this neighborhood have lawn ornaments. The Chens have those metal wind sculptures. Gerald Thompson has a bird bath. The Hendersons have a flagpole with seasonal flags." Patricia selectively enforces rules based on personal whim and vendetta, I explained. "I've been documenting it for months. I'm working with a lawyer to build a harassment case." "Can we join your case?" Amy asked. "This is ridiculous. We're not paying a fine for garden gnomes." "Talk to my lawyer. I'll give you her contact information. In the meantime, document everything. Take photos of every lawn ornament in the neighborhood. Get timestamps. Make her prove she's enforcing this rule equally." The Pattersons became allies in my fight against Patricia Morrison's tyranny. Having another household being targeted helped establish the pattern Jennifer needed for a harassment claim. It also felt good to not be alone in this fight anymore. In July, things escalated dramatically. Patricia called a special board meeting to discuss ongoing violations and community standards. The meeting notice was posted with only 48 hours advance notice, which several residents complained was insufficient. I attended with Jennifer Ellis. The Pattersons came as well. So did Sandra Nguyen, Gerald Thompson, Linda Chen, and about 15 other residents who were starting to wake up to Patricia's overreach. The meeting started with Patricia presenting a long list of alleged violations throughout the community. My name appeared 7 times. The Pattersons appeared twice. But there were also several new names, including people who had previously supported Patricia. Thomas Wheeler, the vice president, looked uncomfortable as Patricia droned on about regulation enforcement and community standards. Even Denise Hoffman seemed less enthusiastic than usual. When Patricia finished her presentation, Jennifer Ellis stood up. "I'm Jennifer Ellis, attorney representing Mr. Simmons and the Patterson family. I'm here to notify the board that we are filing a lawsuit against the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association for selective enforcement, harassment, and violation of Iowa HOA statutes requiring fair and equal treatment of residents." The room went silent. Patricia's face turned red. "You can't sue the HOA," Patricia sputtered. "We're following the rules. You are selectively enforcing rules against specific residents while ignoring identical violations by others. That's illegal under Iowa Code Section 499A, which requires HOAs to enforce rules uniformly. I have extensive documentation proving selective enforcement." Jennifer pulled out a thick folder and began laying out evidence. Photos of lawn ornaments throughout the neighborhood, only some of which had been cited. Records showing that my truck idling violations were fined while dozens of other instances were ignored. Evidence that my landscaping fine was based on inaccurate measurements, while other residents with genuinely overgrown bushes received no fines. "Furthermore," Jennifer continued, "my clients have been fined repeatedly for minor or non-existent violations while residents who are friendly with Mrs. Morrison face no scrutiny whatsoever. This establishes a clear pattern of retaliatory conduct." Richard Kemper, the treasurer, spoke up. How much is this lawsuit going to cost the HOA? Legal defense for this type of case typically runs between $20,000 and $50,000, Jennifer replied. Plus potential damages if we win, which I'm confident we will. $50,000. Richard looked horrified. Patricia, is this worth bankrupting the HOA over warming up a truck? It's about maintaining standards, Patricia insisted. We can't let residents do whatever they want. Sandra Nguyen finally spoke up, her voice shaking slightly. Patricia, maybe we should settle. Zach and the Pattersons have legitimate concerns. We could reverse the fines and establish clearer enforcement guidelines. Absolutely not. We did nothing wrong. Thomas Wheeler cleared his throat. Actually, Patricia, I think Sandra has a point. This has gotten out of hand. I move that we reverse all fines against Mr. Simmons and the Patterson family pending a review of our enforcement policies. I second the motion, Sandra said immediately. Patricia looked betrayed. You can't do this. I'm the president. We're a board, Thomas replied. All in favor. Sandra, Thomas, and Richard voted in favor. Denise Hoffman abstained, clearly unwilling to cross Patricia but also unwilling to support her anymore. The motion passed 3-0 with one abstention. Patricia stood up, shaking with anger. This is a coup. You're all going to regret this. She stormed out of the meeting, leaving her confused board members behind. Thomas took over the meeting, and we spent the next hour discussing new enforcement guidelines that would require documentation, equal application of rules, and a formal appeal process. I left the meeting feeling vindicated but also exhausted. The fines would be reversed, which meant I would get back over $1,000. But more importantly, Patricia's reign of terror was effectively over, except Patricia Morrison was not the type to go down quietly. The next morning, I woke up to find my truck's tires slashed. All 4 of them, cut deeply enough that they were completely destroyed. I called the police immediately. Officer David Brooks arrived within 20 minutes. He was a middle-aged cop with a no-nonsense attitude who took photos and filled out a report. Any idea who might have done this? Officer Brooks asked. I have a strong suspicion, but no proof. I'm in a dispute with my HOA president. Things got heated at a board meeting last night. Patricia Morrison, you know her. We've had a few calls from this neighborhood. She's intense. But unless you have evidence she did this, there's not much I can do beyond file a report for your insurance. I understand. After Officer Brooks left, I called my insurance company and arranged for a tow truck to take my vehicle to a shop. Replacing 4 tires was going to cost about $800, even with insurance covering part of it. I was standing in my driveway waiting for the tow truck when Amy Patterson came over. Zach, I think I got something on camera, she said, holding up her phone. We installed a security camera on our front porch when we moved in. It has a pretty wide angle. I checked the footage from last night. She showed me the video. At 2:37 a.m., a figure in dark clothing walked down the street, approached my truck, knelt beside it, and spent several minutes doing something to each tire before walking away. The video quality was not great in the dark, but you could make out a white Lexus parked 2 houses down with its lights off. Can you send me that footage? I asked. Already done. I sent it to the police department too. I called Officer Brooks back. He returned an hour later, watched the video, and nodded slowly. That's not enough for a positive ID, but it's enough for me to ask some questions. I'll pay Mrs. Morrison a visit. 2 hours later, Officer Brooks came back. Mrs. Morrison denies any involvement and says she was home asleep, he told me. But I noticed she had what looked like a utility knife in her car's center console. When I asked about it, she became very defensive. I also noticed fresh scratches on her hands that she claimed were from gardening. Can you arrest her? Not without more evidence. But I strongly suggested she stay away from you and your property. I also informed her that we would be watching the situation closely. If anything else happens, we'll have grounds for a search warrant. It was not the resolution I wanted, but it was something. I installed security cameras around my house that afternoon, covering all angles of my property. The next week was tense. Patricia stayed inside her house most of the time. When she did venture out, she avoided looking in my direction. Her husband Douglas looked tired and stressed. I heard through the neighborhood gossip that they were fighting constantly. Then, on August 3rd, everything came to a head. I came home from work to find 3 police cars on my street and officers surrounding the Morrison house. Neighbors stood in their yards watching. Officer Brooks saw me and walked over. "You might want to hear this," he said. "We got a warrant to search the Morrison property based on some additional evidence. Turns out Mrs. Morrison has been engaging in quite a bit of illegal activity." "What kind of illegal activity?" "She's been tampering with mail. We found a box in her garage with letters and packages addressed to various residents, some dating back 6 months. Apparently, she's been intercepting HOA-related correspondence and anything else she thought might threaten her control of the board. That's a federal crime." "Yes, it is. Mail tampering is taken very seriously. She's being arrested right now." I watched as Patricia Morrison was led out of her house in handcuffs, still protesting her innocence. Douglas followed behind, looking shell-shocked. Several neighbors were openly staring. Margaret Whitfield had her hand over her mouth in shock. Officer Brooks continued, "We also found evidence suggesting she might have been embezzling HOA funds. The FBI will be investigating that angle. Apparently, several $1,000s are unaccounted for over the past 2 years." The HOA embezzlement investigation moved quickly. The FBI Financial Crimes Unit subpoenaed all HOA records. Richard Kemper, the treasurer, cooperated fully and provided documentation showing numerous irregularities in how Patricia had handled funds. Money allocated for landscaping contracts went to companies that did not exist. Maintenance funds were withdrawn as cash without proper documentation. Assessment increases were pocketed rather than deposited. By the end of August, Patricia Morrison faced federal charges for mail fraud and embezzlement totaling over $40,000. She was released on bail but ordered to stay away from all HOA business and residents. The neighborhood was in shock. People who had supported Patricia's strict rule enforcement were now questioning everything. Had those fines been about rules or about money? How much of the HOA budget had been stolen? What else had Patricia done? Sandra Nguyen called an emergency board meeting in early September. Thomas Wheeler had resigned, wanting nothing more to do with the situation. Denise Hoffman was facing questions about whether she had known about Patricia's activities. Richard Kemper was cooperating with investigators, but was clearly traumatized by the whole situation. At the meeting, Sandra addressed the gathered residents. About 40 people showed up, the largest attendance in HOA history. "First, I want to apologize," Sandra said, her voice steady despite obvious emotion. "Many of us saw Patricia's behavior becoming increasingly erratic and controlling, but we did not act decisively enough to stop it. Residents were harassed, funds were stolen, and the community suffered. That ends now." She outlined a plan for rebuilding the HOA with transparency, accountability, and fair enforcement. All outstanding fines from Patricia's tenure would be reviewed. A forensic audit would determine exactly how much money was stolen and from whom. The board would be reconstituted with elections in November as originally scheduled. I also want to specifically apologize to Zach Simmons and the Patterson family, Sandra continued, looking at me. You were right to fight back against unfair treatment. This community owes you gratitude for exposing corruption that might have continued for years. The meeting ended with a unanimous vote to revoke all fines issued during Patricia's presidency and to implement new oversight procedures for HOA finances and rule enforcement. As people filed out, several neighbors approached me to apologize. Gerald Thompson shook my hand and admitted he should have spoken up sooner. Linda Chen apologized for not supporting me at the board meeting. Even Margaret Whitfield acknowledged that she had been wrong to avoid me. I should have listened when you said she was targeting you, Margaret said quietly. I just thought you were being difficult. I'm sorry. Apology accepted, I told her. And if you need a jump start this winter, I'll help. Just maybe speak up next time someone is being treated unfairly. The criminal case against Patricia Morrison proceeded through the fall. Her lawyer tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the prosecutors were not interested in being lenient. Mail fraud and embezzling from an HOA were serious crimes that affected dozens of people. In October, Douglas Morrison filed for divorce. According to Sandra, who heard it from Denise, Patricia's legal troubles and controlling behavior had destroyed their marriage. Douglas moved out of Meadowbrook Estates entirely, wanting nothing to do with the community or his soon-to-be ex-wife. The HOA board elections in November were contentious, but ultimately productive. Sandra Nguyen was elected president with overwhelming support. Amy Patterson agreed to serve as secretary. Marcus Patterson became treasurer with a mandate to implement robust financial controls. Two other residents who had been critical of Patricia's overreach filled the remaining seats. I was asked to run for the board but declined. I had no interest in HOA politics. I just wanted to live in peace and warm up my truck when it was cold. Patricia Morrison's trial was scheduled for January. In the meantime, she stayed in her house, alone and isolated. Her white Lexus sat in the driveway, never moving. Neighbors avoided eye contact when walking past. The woman who had once wielded absolute power over Meadowbrook Estates was now a pariah awaiting judgment. On December 15th, the forensic audit results were released. Patricia had embezzled $47,600 over 2.5 years. The money had been spent on personal expenses, luxury goods, spa treatments, vacations, and her car payments. None of the funds were recoverable because she had spent everything. The HOA filed a civil lawsuit to try to recoup losses, but Patricia's assets were limited. Her house was mortgaged. Her car was leased. Her bank accounts were empty. The residents would likely never see that money again. On December 20th, something unexpected happened. I received a letter from Patricia Morrison. It was handwritten and brief. Mr. Simmons, I owe you an apology. I was wrong to fine you for warming up your truck. I was wrong about many things. I let power and control consume me until I destroyed my own life and hurt good people. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that you were right to fight back. You exposed corruption that needed to be stopped. I'm sorry for everything. Patricia Morrison. I read the letter 3 times. It seemed genuine, but it was hard to feel sympathy for someone who had caused so much harm. Still, I appreciated the acknowledgement. On January 7th, Patricia Morrison pleaded guilty to 1 count of mail fraud and 1 count of embezzlement. The plea deal resulted in a sentence of 18 months in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. She was also ordered to pay restitution, though everyone knew she would never be able to pay back what she stole. At her sentencing hearing, which I attended out of curiosity, Patricia read a statement apologizing to the community and accepting responsibility for her actions. She looked smaller somehow, diminished by the consequences of her choices. The judge was not sympathetic, noting that Patricia had abused a position of trust and harmed many people for personal gain. When it was over, Officer Brooks found me in the courthouse hallway. "Justice served, I suppose," he said. "Not every case ends with the bad guy in jail." "I never wanted this," I replied honestly. "I just wanted to warm up my truck. Sometimes standing up to petty tyrants reveals bigger crimes. You did the right thing." Patricia Morrison was taken into custody immediately after sentencing. Her house was sold to cover debts. The white Lexus was repossessed. Within a month, it was as if she had never existed in Meadowbrook Estates. Life slowly returned to normal. The new HOA board implemented sensible policies focused on maintaining property values without harassing residents. Fines were rare and only issued after documented warnings and opportunities to correct violations. Enforcement was transparent and equal. Winter arrived, and I warmed up my truck every cold morning without fear of fines. My neighbors waved as they scraped their windows. I helped jump-start vehicles when asked, and people actually thanked me. The Pattersons' kids played with their dog in the yard, and their garden gnomes remained proudly displayed. On a particularly cold morning in late January, almost exactly 1 year after this whole ordeal began, I stood in my driveway letting my truck idle and warm up. The temperature was -15 degrees. Steam rose from my exhaust pipe. My coffee was hot and perfect. Sandra Nguyen pulled out of her driveway and stopped next to me, rolling down her window. "Morning, Zach," she called. "Cold enough for you. Just another Iowa winter," I replied. "Hey, I wanted to thank you again for standing up to Patricia. You saved this community." "I just wanted to warm up my truck, Sandra," she laughed. "Sometimes the smallest things lead to the biggest changes. Stay warm." She drove off, and I stood there for another few minutes, finishing my coffee and watching the neighborhood come alive. People headed to work. Kids waited for school buses. Life continued. I thought about everything that had happened. The fines, the harassment, the escalating conflict, the investigation and trial. It had been exhausting and stressful and expensive, but it had also been necessary. Someone had to stand up to Patricia Morrison's tyranny. Someone had to say that the rules applied to everyone equally, and that power could not be abused without consequences. I finished my coffee, got in my truck, and drove to work. The engine ran smoothly, properly warmed and ready for the day. No fines awaited me in my mailbox. No HOA president watched from across the street. No threats of liens or legal action hung over my head. Just a normal morning in Meadowbrook Estates, exactly as it should be. The months that followed were remarkably peaceful. The new board proved competent and fair, focused on genuine community improvement rather than petty control. Assessment increases were justified and transparent. Maintenance projects were completed on schedule and within budget. Disputes were resolved through conversation rather than fines. Spring arrived, and I planted flowers in my front yard without worrying about whether they were approved colors. The Pattersons hosted a neighborhood barbecue, and most of the street attended. People chatted, kids played, and there was a sense of actual community that had been missing during Patricia's reign. Gerald Thompson's Buick finally died completely in March, and he bought a newer used car with my help finding a reliable model. Linda Chen got her alternator fixed, and her minivan ran perfectly. Margaret Whitfield bought a portable jump starter and proudly showed me how she knew how to use it. In April, Amy Patterson was promoted to head nurse in her department at Mercy Medical Center. Marcus got a significant raise at his IT job. They hosted a celebration dinner and invited me over. Their kids showed me their report cards, both straight A's. Buddy the golden retriever had learned several new tricks. "Thank you for making us feel welcome here," Amy said as I was leaving that evening. "When we first arrived and got that fine for the garden gnomes, I thought we had made a terrible mistake buying this house. You helped us fight back and stay." "You helped me too," I replied. "I was fighting alone until you showed up. Having allies made all the difference." The criminal case had closed, but the civil lawsuit against Patricia Morrison continued through the spring. Her assets were seized and liquidated, generating about $12,000 that was returned to the HOA. It was a fraction of what she stole, but it was something. The rest would likely never be recovered. I received a check for $750 in May, representing the reversal of my original fines. I deposited it and tried not to think about all the time and stress those fines had caused. Money was replaceable. Peace of mind was not. In June, I got a call from Jennifer Ellis. "I wanted to let you know that Patricia Morrison was denied early release," Jennifer said. She applied after serving 6 months, claiming good behavior. The parole board reviewed her case and determined she needed to serve her full sentence. How much longer does she have? 12 more months in federal prison, then 3 years supervised release. She'll be prohibited from serving in any HOA leadership position as part of her supervised release conditions. Good. She should never have that kind of power over people again. Agreed. How are things in the neighborhood? Honestly. Great. The new board is doing an excellent job. It feels like an actual community now. That's what happens when you remove toxic leadership. People can finally breathe. You should be proud, Zach. You started this. "I just wanted to warm up my truck," Jennifer laughed. "And you ended up exposing embezzlement and mail fraud." Sometimes the smallest acts of resistance reveal the biggest crimes. Summer passed peacefully. I worked at Henderson's Auto Repair, helped neighbors when they needed automotive assistance, and enjoyed living in a community that finally functioned properly. The neighborhood kids started asking me questions about cars and engines, and I found myself teaching impromptu lessons about basic maintenance in my driveway on weekends. In September, the HOA organized a community improvement day. Residents volunteered to clean up common areas, plant flowers around the neighborhood entrance, and repaint the community center. It was the kind of positive collective action that should have always characterized Meadowbrook estates. I spent the day helping repair a fence around the children's playground. Marcus Patterson worked alongside me, and we talked about everything from politics to sports to raising kids, though I had none of my own. "You ever think about running for the board?" Marcus asked while we hammered in fence posts. "Never. I have no interest in HOA politics." "That's exactly why you should. You're not interested in power or control. You just want things to function fairly. Ask me again in a few years. Right now, I'm enjoying not fighting with anyone." Fair enough. As fall arrived and the weather cooled, I thought about how much had changed in less than 2 years. A simple act of warming up my truck had led to conflict, investigation, criminal prosecution, and ultimately the transformation of an entire community. It seemed disproportionate, but that was often how change happened. Small injustices revealed systemic problems. Standing up to petty tyranny exposed deeper corruption. On the anniversary of receiving my first fine, I stood in my driveway on a cold October morning letting my truck warm up. The temperature was just above freezing, not as brutal as that January morning 2 years ago, but cold enough to justify the warm-up. No one watched from across the street. The Morrison house had been sold to a young couple with twin babies who smiled and waved whenever they saw me. No fines awaited me in my mailbox. No threats hung over my head. Just a man warming up his truck on a cold morning, exactly as it should be. I got in my truck, backed out of my driveway, and headed to work. The engine ran smoothly. The heater blasted warm air. Everything functioned exactly as designed. Sometimes the simplest things are the most important. The right to warm up your vehicle. The right to be treated fairly. The right to stand up against injustice without being persecuted for it. These were not grand philosophical concepts. They were the basic foundations of living in a functional community. Patricia Morrison had forgotten that. She had believed that rules existed to give her power over others rather than to create order for everyone's benefit. She had used her position to harass, control, and ultimately steal from the people she was supposed to serve. And when someone finally said no, when someone finally pushed back against her tyranny, the whole corrupt structure collapsed. I did not set out to be a hero or a whistleblower. I just wanted to warm up my truck. But sometimes doing the simple, right thing in the face of injustice is enough. Sometimes refusing to back down, documenting everything, and holding people accountable is exactly what needs to happen. The legal system worked, eventually. Patricia Morrison was convicted and imprisoned. The stolen money was partially recovered. The HOA was reformed with proper oversight and accountability. Justice was served, imperfect and incomplete, but served nonetheless. As I drove to work that morning, I realized I had learned something important. Communities function when people stand up for what is right, even in small ways. Tyranny thrives when good people stay silent and hope someone else will solve the problem. Change requires action, even when that action is as simple as refusing to pay an unjust fine and documenting evidence. I never wanted to be the person who challenged the HOA. I wanted to be the helpful neighbor who jumped cars and gave free advice. But circumstances forced me into conflict, and I chose to fight rather than submit. That choice made all the difference. The case was closed. Patricia Morrison was in prison. The HOA functioned properly. My truck was warm and running smoothly. Life had returned to normal, better than normal actually, because the community had learned what not to tolerate. I pulled into Henderson's Auto Repair at 6:45, 15 minutes before my shift started. Randy Henderson's truck was already there, as always. I grabbed my coffee and headed inside to start another day of honest work fixing vehicles and helping customers. It was a good life. Simple, straightforward, and free from the harassment that had consumed so much of my energy 2 years ago. I had fought the fight that needed fighting. I had stood up when others stayed silent. I had exposed corruption and helped rebuild a community. And every cold morning, I warmed up my truck without fear or guilt, exactly as any responsible vehicle owner should.